So when we left Odysseus, he had just barely escaped the ocean with his life, thanks to Ino and her veil. And he crawls onto the shore absolutely naked. He has no clothes, nothing. He arrives with nothing, and he almost died. All of his men is dead. He has nothing. He's exhausted. He covers himself up with some fallen leaves, and he just crashes. He falls asleep. We know that while this was happening, Athena, the goddess who had pleaded to Zeus on Odysseus's behalf, has disguised herself as an old lady, and she has convinced Telemachus, Odysseus's son, to go look for him. He says that, yeah, that's a great idea, and he decides to go look for him. And all of the suitors, all of the men who are in Ithaca trying to get Penelope to marry them, they decide to go and try to murder Telemachus. And if they murder Telemachus, then Penelope will marry one of them, and they will get to be the king. Chapter 7 is Nausicaa. In the land of the Phaeacians, while Odysseus slept, the goddess Athena was at work planning his rescue. She knew exactly the right person to help him. Beautiful Nausicaa, the daughter of the Phaeacian king. Athena made her way to King Alcinous's palace and found Nausicaa sleeping in her room. Two maids were asleep by the door to guard against intruders, but Athena wafted past them and through the closed doors like a puff of wind. Disguising herself as one of Nausicaa's friends, she hovered over the princess's bed and whispered into her dreams. "Look at your room, Nausicaa. Dirty clothes all over the floor. You'll never find a husband if you're so untidy. Get your father to lend us a wagon in the morning, and we'll go down to the river and do some washing. Then you'll be ready if someone handsome comes courting." And there's Nausicaa in her bed with her dirty clothes looking all over her floor. I'm sure none of your bedrooms look like that, do they? No. Athena knew that would get Nausicaa hurrying down to the river. And the washing pools were right by the place where Odysseus was hiding. Smiling to herself, the goddess flew back to high Olympus. As rosy-fingered dawn lit up the sky, Nausicaa awoke and remembered her dream. Quickly, she dressed and went to find her father. "Please lend me a wagon," she said to King Alcinous, "to go down to the washing pools. I want to wash all of my fine clothes, and yours too, just in case someone important comes calling." She was too shy to mention what kind of someone she meant, but her father understood. Without asking questions, he told his men to prepare a mule cart. Nausicaa went all around the palace, collecting armfuls of beautiful, brightly colored clothes. She packed them into the cart, and her mother filled a box with food and wine. "Enjoy yourselves," she said. Chattering and laughing, Nausicaa and her friends went down to the washing pools. They had no idea Odysseus was sleeping underneath the olive tree there. They expected to spend the whole day on their own. At first, they worked hard, treading the washing clean in the clear water. Once that was done, they spread the clothes out to dry on the shingle while they bathed and enjoyed their picnic. Then Nausicaa sang to keep time while they played with the ball. The clothes were dry, and the girls were about to pack up and go home when Nausicaa threw the ball for the first time. One of her friends reached out to catch it and missed. It slipped into the river, and they all shrieked loudly, "Ah!" The noise awoke Odysseus. He opened his eyes and sat up, instantly alert. Who were the people he could hear down by the river? Were they friendly or hostile? Human beings or gods? He was in no state to meet strangers, but he had to find out. He crawled out of his hiding place, breaking off a leafy branch to hide his nakedness, and holding it out in front of him, he walked down to the river. He was a terrifying sight. His filthy skin was covered in scratches, his eyes were wild and desperate, and his whole body was crusted with salt. When the girls saw him, they screamed and ran away in all directions. Only Nausicaa stood her ground. While the others hid in the bushes, she faced Odysseus, waiting for him to speak. "Princess," he said, "I see that you're brave and beautiful. If you are human, too, have pity on me. I have been adrift for 19 days on the dark sea. Yesterday I struggled ashore, but, as you see, I have lost everything. Please give me some rags to cover my body and tell me how to reach the nearest town." "Sir," said Nausicaa, "I am the daughter of King Alcinous, the king of this country. Since the gods have brought you here, of course we'll help you. My friends and I will give you some clothes, and when you have washed, we'll take you to the town." She called to her maids, and they crept out of their hiding places. They chose a tunic and a cloak for Odysseus, and gave him olive oil for his bath. Then they left him on his own to wash in the river. When he came to find them again, he looked like a different person. He was clean from head to toe, and his newly washed hair hung in a thick, shining mass. Dressed in the bright cloak and tunic, he was the handsomest man Nausicaa had ever seen. "That's the kind of husband I'd like," she whispered to her maids. Wisely, she decided not to take him straight back to the palace. People were sure to gossip if she turned up with such a handsome stranger. Instead, she asked him to wait in a little wood just outside of the town. "Give us time to reach home," she said, "then come after us. The palace is easy to find. Walk straight in and speak to my mother," checking my pronunciation guide, "Arete. Speak to my mother, Arete. She'll be sitting by the fireside spinning purple yarn. Fling yourself at her feet and ask for help. If you win her over, she'll make sure you get home safely." Leaving Odysseus in the wood, Nausicaa drove the cart back to the palace. As soon as he was alone, Odysseus sent up a prayer to Athena. "May the Phaeacians treat me kindly," he said. There was no immediate answer, but as he walked toward town, Athena herself came to meet him, disguised as a young girl carrying a jar of water. "Can you tell me the way to the palace?" Odysseus asked. "I'll take you," said Athena, "but don't say a word to anyone on the way. The people here don't like strangers." She wrapped him in a magic mist that made him invisible to everyone they passed. Then she led him along the quays and past the bustling harbors to the doors of King Alcinous's palace. "Go straight inside," she said. "Don't speak until you reach Queen Arete. She is wise and noble, and if you touch her heart, you will have a good chance of reaching home at last." Athena left him at the entrance to the palace. For a moment, Odysseus stood still, staring up at the massive golden doors on their posts of silver. Then he stepped through into the great hall. The whole palace was bustling with activity, but Odysseus was still invisible. He walked straight past everything until he reached Queen Arete, spinning beside the hearth. As he flung himself down at her feet, the magic mist cleared suddenly, so that he seemed to appear out of nowhere. There was a startled silence in the hall. Everyone stared at him. He looked up at the queen and spoke in a clear voice. "Noble Arete, may the gods bless you and your family. I have suffered many hardships and disasters, and I need your help to reach my home again." Bowing politely, he sat down in the ashes by the hearth to wait for the queen's reply. For a moment, no one knew what to say. Then a wise old lord called, Eumaeus. Nope. I don't have this one on my list. Echenius, maybe, broke the silence. "King Alcinous," he said, "you don't usually leave your guest sitting in the ashes. Aren't you going to welcome this man?" Immediately, the king called for water to rinse Odysseus's hands and told the maids to bring him food and wine. "Refresh yourself, sir," he said. "Sleep in my palace tonight. Tomorrow I will ask you about your adventures, and we can discuss your journey home." Queen Arete ordered her maids to prepare a bed for Odysseus. That night he lay down under bright rugs and warm purple blankets and slept soundly until morning. The next day, King Alcinous gave orders for a ship to be made ready with 52 young men to take the oars. "This is for you, stranger," he said to Odysseus. "But before you leave, let us show you our Phaeacian hospitality." He organized a great feast for Odysseus and invited the whole town. When they had eaten, the blind poet Demodocus took up his lyre and began to sing a story of the Trojan War. Odysseus was cut to the heart, remembering his friends who had died in that war. King Alcinous saw his sad face, but he didn't ask any questions. Instead, as soon as the story was finished, he stood up and stepped back from the table. "You have shared our feast," he said to Odysseus, "and heard our great poet sing. Now come and see how good our sportsmen are." They flocked out of the palace, and all the young men started jumping and running. They set up wrestling matches and competed at throwing the discus. Everyone took part, including Prince Laodamas, Nausicaa's brother. "How about you, sir?" he said to Odysseus. "Would you like to share our sports?" Odysseus shook his head. "Not after all I've been through. I need my strength for traveling home." One of the other young men looked up and down rudely. "You don't look like much of an athlete," he said. Odysseus was annoyed. "I used to be one of the best," he said sharply. "Let me show you what I can do, even now." He jumped to his feet and seized the biggest, heaviest discus. Swinging his arm back, he flung it with all his strength, making the Phaeacians duck as it went flying over their heads. It was a huge throw, beating all the other attempts. Odysseus watched it land and then turned to face his hosts. "Is that enough?" he said. "Would you like me to throw again? Or does one of you want to challenge me to a boxing match? I can wrestle and run too, and I'm a better archer than anyone else on earth. How else would you like to test me?" "Noble guest," said King Alcinous. "You have proved yourself already. I don't know who you are, but you're just the kind of man I'd like my daughter to marry." Odysseus shook his head, smiling. "She is a beautiful, wise girl, but I have a wife already. And a son, too. I must go home to them." "We'll send you on your way very soon," said Alcinous. "But first there are gifts we want to give you." He led Odysseus back into the palace and presented him with a bronze and silver sword. The Phaeacian lords added so many other treasures that Alcinous had to provide a great wooden coffer to hold them all. Then they enjoyed a second feast together. Afterward, Demodocus took up his lyre again. This time, he began to sing about the wooden horse the Greeks had used to capture Troy. Crafty Odysseus devised the plan and built a hollow horse made out of wood. The Greeks embarked, pretending to retreat, and left the horse behind upon the shore. Triumphantly, the Trojans took it in, not guessing how they were deceived, not knowing Odysseus and his men were crouched inside. Listening to the song, Odysseus saw the shadowy faces of his comrades crouching beside him in the horse's belly. He remembered those same faces lit with the fire of battle as they broke out of the horse and rampaged through the sleeping streets of Troy. Quietly, he began to weep. Alcinous signaled to the poet to stop singing. "Sir," he said to Odysseus, "we can see that you are noble, but you have not told us anything about yourself. Who are you, and why does this song cause you such grief?" Odysseus drew a long breath. "I am Odysseus, Laertes' son," he said. "I was one of the men who crouched inside that wooden horse. I saw Troy fall and the whole city burn. And ever since then, I have been trying to get home to Ithaca." Alcinous stared at him. "But it's almost 10 years since the end of the Trojan War. Why has the journey taken you so long?" Odysseus drew another breath, and then he began to tell the whole story of his travels, right from the beginning. Meanwhile, in Sparta, remember, Telemachus had traveled to Sparta to find out about his dad. Meanwhile, in Sparta, Telemachus was also listening to stories about his father's adventures. "Odysseus is so clever," Queen Helen said. "Once he disguised himself as a slave in filthy rags and sneaked into Troy to find out the Trojan secrets." "If he was so clever, why couldn't he save himself?" said Telemachus miserably. "He's dead, and our house is full of vile men who want to marry my mother." "He's not dead," said King Menelaus. "I know that for certain." Telemachus caught his breath. "Tell me," he said, "how do you know?" "When I was sailing back from Troy," said Menelaus, "my ships were becalmed in Egypt for 20 days. They would still be there if I hadn't been helped by a nymph, the daughter of the old man of the sea. She took pity on us. 'My father knows how you can't get home,' she said, 'but he won't tell unless you catch him.' 'Oh, my father knows how you can get home,' she said, 'but he won't tell unless you catch him. And you can only do that in the evening when he comes out of the water to tend his seals. You must hide on the beach and seize him while he's counting them. Then you must hold tightly until he stops changing his shape.'" "How can anyone hide on a beach?" Telemachus said. Menelaus smiled ruefully. "There was only one way. 4 of us disguised ourselves in seal skins and lay on the beach with all the other seals. The stench was dreadful, but the plan worked. When the old man came to count his seals, we grabbed him and held him fast while he struggled to escape. He changed into a lion and then a snake. After that, he became a panther, then a giant bear. But the 4 of us clung on tightly through it all, even when he transformed himself into running water. Finally, he was too exhausted to change anymore. He returned to his own shape and told us about how to reach home. And I asked him about all my comrades from Troy. Even my father, said Telemachus. Menelaus nodded. I asked if he was dead. Not dead, said the old man, but trapped on Calypso's island with no ship to take him home. Where is that island? Telemachus asked eagerly. Menelaus shrugged. Only the gods know where, he said. Back in Alcinous's palace, Odysseus came to the end of his story. When he stopped speaking, there was silence in the great hall. You have been through great suffering, Alcinous said at last, but your journey is almost over. A ship is ready for you. At sunset, it will leave for Ithaca. When the sun sank below the horizon, Odysseus thanked Alcinous and Arete for their help. Nausicaa came down to the harbor to say goodbye. Good luck go with you, my friend, she said. Don't forget me when you come to your own country. How could I forget you, Odysseus said. You gave me back my life. If I reach Ithaca, I will think of you every single day. As the stars began to come out, he boarded the ship, taking all the treasures the Phaeacians had given him. The oarsmen spread rugs in the stern so that he could sleep while they were traveling. All through the night, the ship sped over the ocean like a falcon. When the morning star rose, it was close to Ithaca, and Odysseus was still sleeping soundly. The sailors didn't wake him. They lifted him carefully and took him ashore, laying him down on a sandy beach. His treasures were heaped up in the shade of an olive tree, where they would be safe until he awoke. He was fast asleep. He was still fast asleep when the ship set off back to Phaeacia. So all these Phaeacian men on the ship, they feel really bad for Odysseus. So they're just wrapping him up in some rugs and blankets and letting him rest. They even carried him to the shore and carried all of his treasures with him. And then they set off back for Phaeacia. But Poseidon wasn't sleeping. He was filled with a black and terrible rage when he saw Odysseus arriving back in Ithaca with more treasure than ever before. What mockery is this? He bellowed at Zeus. I left this vile man wrecked and destitute, and the Phaeacians have made him rich. I shall destroy their ship and drown the sailors, and I'll fling up a circle of huge mountains around their city to cut it off from the rest of the world. Let them learn to fear me. Peace, Earthshaker, said Zeus. There is no need to ruin the city. If you must destroy the ship, simply turn it into a rock as it reaches the harbor. All the Phaeacians will see and fear you forever. The idea delighted Poseidon. He swooped toward the Phaeacian city. As everyone on shore watched the ship approach, he struck at it with his hand, turning it to stone. Immediately, it stopped, rooted to the bottom of the sea. The watchers on the shore didn't realize what had happened. Only King Alcinous understood. We have angered Poseidon, he said. This Odysseus whom we helped is under his curse. We can't save him from that, but we can pray for Poseidon's forgiveness on our city. They made a great sacrifice of bulls to Poseidon, and he relented and made peace with them. But every time they saw the stone ship outside the harbor, they pitied Odysseus for having such a powerful god as his enemy. What do you think is going to happen to Odysseus next? Sleeping on the beach, surrounded by his treasures?